Welcome, folks.
Welcome, everybody. You know, the Rolling Stones.
Very low. Can you pump it up a little bit?
The Rolling Stones used to have their music censored all over the place in the 1960s.
Perfect choice. Now we can't hear it anymore, though. Welcome, folks. We'll get started here in a couple of minutes. We're letting people come into the room. We had a request for you to rock and roll, David.
You know, Otis Redding also did a great rendition of Satisfaction.
Hey, I'll be listening to that immediately this evening.
Oh, I love Otis Redding.
One of my favorites.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll get started here in just a moment.
All right, I don't want to play too much of the song because then it runs afoul of the YouTube copyright, folks.
Oh, right, that's good. That's right there. Well, thank you all for joining us very much. I see some of you have already started to use the question and answer feature, so you know that's there. We want this to be interactive this evening, so please feel free to add questions as the evening goes, and we will try our best to get to them. Welcome to the Institute for Common Power, one of our initiatives, what we consider one of the most important initiatives that we have this evening, or going on right now, is the Truth Matters initiative. I want to show you a little bit about our agenda for this evening. We are going to talk some about the Institute for Common Power so that you know what we are doing and who we are. I'm going to read to you our Truth Matters initiative. We will hear from Dr. Michael Butler from Flagler College in St. Augustine, Florida. And then there'll be a panel discussion with myself, my colleague, Dr. David Domke, and Dr. Michael Butler. And so as we go throughout the evening, as I mentioned, please place questions and comments in the question and answer portion of this Zoom call. I am Dr. Terry Ann Scott. I am the director for the Institute for Common Power. I spent a number of years in higher education. I was a professor of African American and United States history. I retired from that position last summer at Hood College here in Maryland. I was also chair of the history department when I left that position so that I could become the director of the Institute for Common Power. I adore teaching. I adore higher education. I've wanted to be a professor since I was 15 years old. But there was a moment and an urgency right now that beckoned a shift in the work that I'm doing. We still believe in education. We are trying to do it on as large a scale as possible, and we are trying to support educators who are out there on the firing lines, who their livelihoods are in danger because of this attack on truth that's going on in the country. I learned just today about Dr. Samuel Jockel, who was a professor at Palm Beach Atlantic University in Florida. He was fired. His contract was not renewed because he was teaching a unit on racial justice, and a parent of one of his students complained. This is becoming an all too common narrative. And we're going to talk about that tonight, and we're going to talk about ways that we can combat it, because what we do here at the Institute is education to action. Now you see two organizations here. Common Power is essentially the parent organization of the Institute. We are the educational branch. Common Power is a Seattle-based organization that does work all over the country, and we do work to bring about voting justice. We knock on doors, we make phone calls, we are starting to do advocacy as well. And the Institute for Common Power brings people into the work of Common Power. We're going to talk some about that tonight. We also will drop in the chat this evening a way for you to register for our first Thursdays that David and I will conduct. The first one will be April 6th, so that you can learn better ways, more ways that you can get involved. So we do this work through lectures, through conversations like this, through workshops, through our Truth and Purpose learning tours, where we take, for instance, K through 12 educators on a journey through the South. We just chose our new cohort. We give them scholarships because teachers typically are not paid enough to take such journeys. And we teach them about the history of this country and so much more. As part of our endeavors, we created something called the Truth Matters Initiative. And I believe it's important for me to read that to you and what is at stake and what we plan to do about it right now. So I ask you to follow along as I read our Truth Matters Initiative. We are confronted today in America by an attack on truth in education. It is an attempt by politically motivated individuals, government offices, and politicians to halt the full teaching of American life by eradicating terrible and painful, but fully truthful aspects of our past, present, and potential futures. At their core, such attacks seek to also erase the triumphs of African Americans and how they have been vital to building this nation. Additionally, these attacks dismiss how African Americans have worked diligently for civil rights and voting justice. The Institute for Common Power cannot and will not idly watch. We will work for common power, starting with the most foundational act in our democracy, the right to vote by all Americans. Ensuring a vote for all is essential to dismantling systems of injustice and creating equitable healthcare, living wages, decent housing, affordable education, and so much more. The Institute for Common Power is committed to teaching the full truth of American life, to countering those who are trying to silence it, to supporting educators who stand for it, and to partnering with organizations and leaders who are committed to ensuring that we create a just and inclusive democracy. The Institute for Common Power provides education that is interactive, experiential, accessible, and unbound by traditional systemic and financial hurdles. We both lead by example in our work and seek to empower everyone to make a difference. No one can do everything, but all of us can and must contribute to genuine progress in the struggles for voting and a just and inclusive democracy as we work to safeguard truth. Our Truth Matters initiatives encompasses a number of things. Many of you joined us just a couple of weeks ago when we had Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries, the brother of Representative Hakeem Jeffries, on this program to talk about the long history of these kinds of silencing measures, as well as African American agency and some of the things that people are doing around the country. This evening, we are honored to be joined by Dr. Michael Butler as we look at In Search of Truth in Education in Florida. I have to note that Dr. Michael Butler is representing himself this evening and not his institution. The institution is Flagler College in St. Augustine, Florida, and he is the Keenan Distinguished Professor of History and the Director of African American Studies. And so as I mentioned to you this evening, the way that our format will work is that Dr. Butler will speak for a while to place everything in context of what is happening in Florida. And then Dr. Domke is going to talk to us just a little bit more about some of the things that are happening in the K through 12 level in Florida. And then we will have a panel discussion. So please, as we go through this evening, start to put those questions in the question and answer box, and we will get to them as we go along. With that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Butler.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scott, Dr. Domke, and for all of the people who are here and want to unfortunately hear about the war on educational truth in the state of Florida. You know, the current battle just reinforces what one of my favorite documentarians, Billy Corbin, often says, and that is that the Florida of today is the America of tomorrow. And we are seeing that transpire at a local, regional, and statewide level here. And make no mistake about it, what's going on here in regard to the manufactured culture wars on higher ed is going to become part of a much larger national blueprint that'll be unveiled in the not too distant future. I guess my story began several years ago in graduate school, right? As the accent probably indicates, I am not from Seattle, Washington, where we're having a watch party. I am not from Michigan. I am from LA. I'm from Lower Alabama. And the question of how a white guy who is a first-generation college graduate end up teaching African-American and civil rights history, it really cuts to the foundation of what I think is most problematic about Florida House Bill 999. Now, Florida House Bill 999 on the 16th of March made it out of its first committee and has moved into a much larger circulation. It's going to be passed. And one of the things that it claims necessitates restructuring is education, and I quote from the actual bill, education for citizenship of the constitutional republic and the state's existing and emerging workforce needs. Now, I read that for two reasons. Number one, I think that censoring, ignoring, or minimalizing the citizenship history within this constitutional republic is intellectually and politically dishonest. If you want to understand citizenship rights in this country, there is no topic that's more indicative of that struggle, which continues to this day, than the African-American experience. Hard stop. So to censor, to threaten, to terrorize professors within our state universities of trying to ignore the experiences of marginalized peoples within a constitutional republic is, by definition, indoctrination. It's indoctrination by omission, but it's indoctrination. The other thing that I think is really problematic with the bill is that it assumes that it's because of an inadequate history education that we have an existing, quote, workforce need. That in and of itself betrays what the purpose of a history education is for and what it can do. And I'm living proof of that, right? Because what history teaches us is how to think critically about our past, honestly, through an examination of primary sources. It teaches us to write clearly. It teaches us to make evidence-based arguments and demand the same from those we are in dialogue with. And perhaps most importantly, it's one of the only disciplines that actually teaches empathy, because history allows us to comprehend, if not fully understand, the struggles of people whose experiences are not ours. That's empathetic. And empathy leads to learning. It leads to us understanding, in my opinion, what the possibilities of life in a true constitutional republic can bring. Now, so we start Florida House Bill 999, which is going to be a blueprint for a lot of other legislation that's to follow if you've watched the news. It starts from faulty logic that somehow history needs to be retaught for the emphasis of citizenship rights in a constitutional republic, and that a lack of historical knowledge is somehow connected to the existing workforce needs in Florida. I mean, all you have to do on that point is go to federal records and see within our own government where a majority of their hires come from. Within the liberal arts, it's history majors, by and large. So, faulty logic from the beginning, which indicates that maybe we're not dealing with good faith actors. Now, what House Bill 999 does is attack the very principles of higher education and the academic freedom that has been a part of that very, very valuable institutional system, right? One of the things that it does is it takes all hiring decisions and places final authority within the state board of trustees systems, right? So instead of historians hiring historians, I don't even know if search committees now are needed, if There are contractors who are going to be hired. That's part of the evil genius of this bill. It's so vague that no one knows exactly how it's going to work. But final hiring decisions are made by the boards of trustees on state campuses. Boards of trustees are, by their very definition, often political appointments. Second thing that occurs now with House Bill 999 is that all promotion and evaluation steps and procedures will be determined by Board of Trustees. It basically takes the power of hiring within one's discipline away from the experts in the field and moves it to trustees, which in effect politicizes it. You know, it makes you wonder if groups like the Heritage Foundation will be advocating for the hiring of certain disciplines with lists of acceptable candidates. It's happened in the judicial system. It can happen in the educational system. The other thing that, well, another thing that this bill does is that it promotes state spending on activities that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. The cultural war against DE&I initiatives, right? Prohibits, hard stop, all programs related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It creates new general education requirements that promote, quote unquote, neoclassical education on Western European civilization. What does that mean? It's up for interpretation. It prohibits fields that emphasize, and this is in the bill, critical race theory, including but not limited to. Again, the language here is important because it's specific enough to focus one's attention on these topics, but vague enough so that the interpretation can be wide open. Including but not limited to, quote, critical race theory, critical race studies, critical ethnic studies, radical gender theory, queer theory, intersectionality, or any major or minor that includes a curriculum that promotes the concepts listed. Any major or minor that promotes the concepts. Again, a very vague definition. What does that mean? It means what politicized bodies want it to mean. That's what it means. It stresses the concept of American exceptionalism. It removes all promotion, evaluation, and hiring practices from the experts within their fields on college campuses. And perhaps most importantly, it's based on the faulty assumption that not fully being able to teach specific topics is somehow a net positive within a constitutional republic and somehow contributes negatively to the state's existing workplace needs. All you have to do is really follow the political machinations here, which is why what the Institute is doing is so important. This battle has been one which has been over a year in the making. I experienced that firsthand when last January, a seminar that I was to be the lead scholar in providing for K-8 teachers in Osceola County, Florida, which was titled The Long Civil Rights Movement, right? The Long Civil Rights Movement was the title of the seminar. It taught that the civil rights movement didn't begin in 1945 and it didn't end in 1968. It was to give a panoramic view of the American freedom struggle to teachers whose students most needed to hear those histories. Because of the title alone, the Long Civil Rights Movement, the Osceola County School District canceled the seminar. They canceled the seminar because they said the title alone raises questions related to the concepts of critical race theory. Now, of course, there was a backlash, and there was, from some corners, anger and outrage and confusion. But to this date, I still haven't spoken to anyone from Osceola County about the seminar. The seminar was not rescheduled. It has not been held. The cancellation served its purpose. It validated that somehow history equals critical race theory, when it's not history that's the problem, it's nostalgia that's the problem. When people say they love history and they want to teach history and they want to preserve history, what they're actually saying is that if they support these restrictive measures, what they support is nostalgia. They want history that reinforces a narrative that exists concerning to what they want to think about the past, not historical realities. There's a difference there. I was told by one of the reporters who contacted me in the aftermath of that story for NBC News that this story of the Osceola County cancellation is important because in Florida, it's going to be the first of many such stories to come. And we have seen it prove to be true. We have seen it with school board elections. We've seen school board elections have a governor's endorsement for the first time in Florida history, so that the educational bodies that supervise K through 12 educational foundations are altered. We see it in now Don't Say Gay. We see it in Stop Woke. Now we see it in House Bill 999. We see it in the fact that professors are being fired from their jobs because of parental complaints of social justice lessons and curriculum, or perhaps even books that mention these concepts and ideas. We see stories of faculty who are altering their syllabus in a sociology class at the University of Central Florida because they are afraid that that could be used against them if they go up for promotion in the next year. You know, we've already seen it happen in a place like Manatee County, Florida, where teachers in this county, in their private classroom libraries, if a parent finds a book that promotes anything quote unquote inappropriate or pornographic, that teacher can face arrest for a third-degree felony. So we see empty classrooms in our public schools, empty classroom libraries. This is a war on critical thinking. It's a war on parents' rights, right? It's being framed as the parents' rights movement. It's being framed as a war against wokeness, whatever that means. But what it really is a war on truth, a war on thinking, a war against the sharing of ideas and concepts which might make some people reasonably uncomfortable. The Florida of today is the America of tomorrow. And if it can work in the Florida state higher education system, it can work in other places too. That's why we have to pay close attention to our local elections and make sure that we are exercising the vote, that we are holding our representatives accountable, that we are speaking truth when we have the opportunity to do so in forums like this, so that we won't look up one day and realize that one of our fundamental rights to the strongest education that we could possibly attain had been taken from us without our knowledge. So thank you very much. I hope that is a nugget on what is going on here and what the dangers are for people, not just in Florida, but for those who are outside of the state as well.
Thank you, Michael, Dr. Butler. Hey, everybody, I'm Dr. David Domke, former professor at the University of Washington, part of Common Power, part of the Institute, colleague to Dr. Terry Scott, and committed to truth in education. I want to kind of pause and just ground us and center us for a moment. Just to be clear, to say it one more time, Dr. Butler is speaking tonight as a citizen, a personal citizen of the United States. He's not speaking as a representative of Flagler College in Florida. Let me just give you a sense of where Flagler College is. I'm going to show this screen here. Let's see. Because I like maps. Oh, no, don't do that to me. Let's see. There we go. So here's Flagler College. It's over here. St. Augustine, right, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So as far away from the country, pretty much as most people who live in Seattle can get. All right, geographically, about as far as we can get. There's an election in Jacksonville tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for mayor.
For the mayor's race.
For the mayor's race, right?
Yes.
So there's an election that tomorrow will have impact around the state of around where you live. I don't know if you don't. I'm not asking if you live in Jacksonville, but it's in that area.
It
right?
is.
Okay. Absolutely, and that election is going to have an impact upon you and your ability to live and how you live in the state of Florida. What's imperative for all of us here, and the reason why we've launched the Truth Matters initiative at the Institute for Common Power, is that even though many of us on this call are living way across the country or up in Maryland where Dr. Terry's living, or in Maine or in Alaska or wherever, the reality is that we are knit together by a connection to the American democracy. We are connected to that. And the reality is that education doesn't function without, democracy doesn't function without education. It just doesn't. It can work, but it's not one that's any of us want to be part of. So I'm going to show a couple things about Florida, just as an examples, because I want to be very concrete about what this could look like. I'm going to show the bill because you sent me the text, Dr. Butler. I'm going to show the bill because sometimes I think just physically seeing things can make it feel very real. Terry, did you want to jump in and say anything at this point right off the bat, or do you want me just to keep going a little bit?
No, keep going. I do want to acknowledge something that people have said in the chat and that we want to say here. Dr. Butler, people admire your courage and appreciate the fact that you are here talking about this, and we can get to this in a bit, but people wonder at what cost it could be for you. And so there's a recognition of that, and they want to say thank you.
Sure.
Oh,
so
that's very nice. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we have, I got multiple tabs open. I'm not a person that does great with multiple tabs open. I'm like a 3-tab person. Okay. All right. That's the way I am. So I'm going to get it back and I'm going to get it to it in a second, but we have disabled the chat so that if you all put comments in the chat, they're only coming to us. They're only coming to us. The Q&A, according to Zoom, only always comes to us. That's the way it is. But we've disabled the anonymous portion of the Q&A because the reality is we want to be able to host this Zoom event, and we want to do it without anybody Zoom bombing this event in any possible way. And so we were born recently, but not yesterday. Okay. And so the reality is that our risks, our threats, Terry's and mine, are not as significant as maybe Dr. Butler's is on a daily basis right now, or for his job, or for other people. But the reality is that as we move into this body of work, we're going to be smart about this. We're going to try to be wise about the steps that we take and how we move forward into that space. So if you put something in the chat, it's only coming to us. If you put something in the Q&A, it's only coming to us right now. So here I want to show the text of the bill. Dr. Butler, you sent it over to me, and I want to show it to everybody here. So this is what it looks like when it got put onto the floor by, and I don't know how to pronounce this representative's last name, Andrade or
Andrade. Yeah, Alex Andrade.
Alex Andrade is the one who's put this forward, and this is what it looks like in the first opening page, and then I'm going to get to the page 2 or 3 where you can see the real changes. But it's a bill to be entitled, which means it's still needed to be named. Does it have a name? Does it have a working name right now, or is it just 999?
No, it's just 999 right now.
Okay. An act relating to post-secondary educational institutions, revising legislative intent, revising powers and duties of the Board of Governors, amending and revising the academic and research excellence standards for preeminent state research universities, providing requirements for hiring state university faculty, providing requirements for the employment, promotion, and evaluation processes for certain state university employees, authorizing state university boards of trustees to review the tenure status of faculty members, blah, 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 and yada, yada, yada. All this stuff sounds so just like legalese. It's like so important. But nicely, when bills are going to be adopted or changed or modified, they have underlines for most of the key portions. So when we get to the, I think, what is it, the third page here, we get to the legislature intends that the Board of Governors, just to be clear, does the Board of Governors oversee all of the public universities in the state?
Yes, they do.
Okay. The legislature intends that the Board of Governors shall align the missions of each constituent university with the academic success of its students. That, see, like I'm going to say some things that you're not going to say, Dr. Butler. I just want to be like straightforward with you. That's a bunch of BS right there, that they're aligning with the academic success. No, they have a specific narrative and mission they want. Specifically, they want curriculum that promotes citizenship in a constitutional republic, the state's existing emerging workforce needs, as you have already told us, all right? And to get there, it says the board shall periodically review the mission of each constituent university and provide updates or revisions to such mission as appropriate. Upon completion of such review, examine existing academic programs at each constituent university for alignment with the university's mission, and provide direction to each constituent university to remove from its programs any, this is the language you were quoting to us, any major or minor that is based on or otherwise utilizes pedagogical methodology associated with critical theory, including but not limited to critical race theory, critical race studies, critical ethnic studies, radical feminist theory, radical gender theory, queer theory, critical social justice, or intersectionality, as defined in Board of Governors regulation, or any, here we go, or any major or minor that includes a curriculum that promotes the concepts listed, okay? That promotes the concepts listed. All right. Now, there's already been a question in the Q&A. Does this ban traditional Black sororities and fraternities? Does it ban that? So I don't know the answer to that question. So I went to Snopes, which is the online site that looks at claims of that are maybe conspiracy or not. And this is what they've got on there. And I'm showing this to everybody here. Not that ad. Hang on a second. So here we go. During debate before the committee, so the committee just passed it. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct.
So the committee just passed it. So now it's going to the floor of the House. Is that right? Okay.
I think it may go to a bigger committee, but it is going, it is progressing to the actual House vote.
Okay. During debate before the committee behind HB 999, State Rep. Yvonne Hinson raised concern with the bill's primary sponsor, Representative Andrade, saying that as written, it would affect Black Greek life, as had been reported by a local TV news station. A member of the sorority herself, Hinson, this representative, said her interpretation of the bill is that it could also impact the way Black sororities or fraternities operate on campus. Hinson, asking about this, said the bill's language may have a larger impact on advisors of any student-led groups or activities tied to diversity, equity, inclusion. Frankly, Hinson said, faculty that is paid by the university may not be able to be faculty advisors to these groups. They won't be, Hinson said. Even if they will, this is going to intimidate them and create a chilling effect. True or false, Dr. Butler?
True. It already has.
Can you say how? What?
Courses are being modified. Course titles are being changed. At least one professor has been fired. The intimidation and the chilling effect is the intended consequence, and the bill has not even passed the House. It's working.
Okay. So Andrade responded to Hinson and said the bill doesn't impact Black sororities and fraternities or their ability to host social justice events, among other activities. Andrade went on to say that other groups could be impacted. This is the beauty of this horrible stuff. It's how vague it is, right?
Precisely.
One more little bit here. During a Facebook Live event, another state senator, Shervin Jones, argued the bill is so vague that historically Black colleges and universities or other institutions who have Black fraternities or sororities on their campuses can practically say we will no longer be supporting you or on our campuses based off of this law. Another state representative, Angie Nixon, proposed an amendment to the bill that would protect, so everybody listen up here, proposed an amendment to the bill that would protect these fraternities and sororities, but it was not adopted. While the bill is not explicitly banning minority-focused Greek life, it remains to be seen what the final version of the measure would look like following passage in the Senate and approval by DeSantis, just as it remains to be seen what effects the law may have on these organizations. Okay, now, to give you a sense of what it could look like, this is from a new.
Let me stay on the fraternity thing for 1 second.
Okay,
David,
go.
Because I am a member of an African-American fraternity. I'm a Delta Sigma Theta. And it is my recollection, not only when I was in college, but also when I was teaching, that you have to have a faculty advisor to function on campus. And so if this stokes fear, then you won't be able to function. One of the questions in the chat says the groups are chapters of international organizations and not sponsored by the schools. They're given permission to be on campus by the National Pan-Hellenic Council. But while that may be true, if you do not have an advisor, then by default, you no longer function on that campus. And there are going to be very few academics who are going to be willing and able to risk what they have there to be the advisor. And so then that means they, by default, will not function on these university campuses.
Now, I want to show you 2 examples from the New York Times article that ran 2 days ago about textbook publishers. See, to me, I think, let me just step back here for a second. Let me just say a few things. So I think that professors, and I've been one of them, miss the politics of how you have to deal with this rhetorically. Yep. Professors think that we're having a conversation, all right? That we're actually having a conversation. We are not having a conversation, people. What is going on here is an assault on truth. It is done for political purposes. It is to advance a certain agenda. It is a response to the diversification of this country. And it is not a conversation. And because academics think we're having a conversation, they use really big words like academic freedom. All right. Academic freedom is the idea that once you gain a tenured position, you have the chance and the freedom to speak out on different topics. And you can only be fired for morally grave reasons. That's the idea of academic freedom. See, that's actually not a debate I want to even have. I don't even want to have that debate. The debate isn't about academic freedom. The debate is about, the fight is about truth. Are we going to tell the truth about who this country is? All right. Because actually telling the truth frees us all to be better humans and citizens. It doesn't straitjacket us. It actually frees us to do that. So I'm not actually here to have a conversation about academic freedom. I'm just here to say, like, look, I think we're supposed to tell the truth. I think it's It's one of the like teachings of every major religious philosophy. And supposedly we have a president who is the first president who chopped down a cherry tree or something like this because he couldn't tell a lie. These kinds of things. So much so that now we've embedded truth as the highest calling, but we can't live by it. All right, we can't live by it. So can we handle the truth is the question. Can we handle the truth? It's clear that for political purposes, Ron DeSantis and a whole bunch of others have decided that we can't handle that. We can't handle it in Texas. We can't handle it in Georgia. We can't handle it in North Carolina. So this is what this could look like if it plays out. I want to go back to this textbook publishers piece. So we can sit and argue about this and debate about this, but meanwhile, textbook publishers, they got money to make. They got real money to make. And textbook publishing is always the place where truth plays out in education. So credit to the New York Times. They're the ones that brought attention to this. Here's version 1 of a textbook as it currently exists in Florida. Rosa Parks, great American hero. Rosa Parks showed courage. One day, she rode the bus. She was told to move to a different seat because of the color of her skin. She did not. She did what she believed was right. Now, Dr. Terry and Dr. Butler and I can have long-running fun conversations about whether Rosa Parks was the one who really led to the civil rights movement and what was her role in all this. But we don't debate at all that she was a courageous person, that she showed courage in that moment and she defied the racism and the racial segregation law of that place. Like there's no debate about that. That is, Terry, is that factually true?
It is factually true. There is no debate that what led to her being arrested was, in fact, the fact that she was African-American. No debate.
No debate. So here's the proposed version now, folks, the proposed version by the textbook publisher. Rosa Parks showed courage. One day she rode the bus. She was told to move to a different seat. She did not. She did what she believed was right.
And then what happens if the student follows up to the teacher and says, well, why did they do that? Because I believe in these laws, it is written into it that if the teacher then assigns or talks about the reason being that it was her race and that there was a racial divide, that teacher is then in violation of the law. Is that right, Dr. Butler?
That is absolutely correct. An even greater problem, I think, is that by omitting the obvious, which leads to an examination of Jim Crow. Why is Rosa Parks a hero? Why didn't she respect the law?
That's right.
We support law and order. We support our police. Why is she lionized in a textbook? She believed it was right, but she broke the law. She got what she deserved. This leads us down a slippery slope of absolute, I can't even put it in words that your viewers would probably appreciate, but this is a mind bleed. If you omit the reason that she is arrested was because she was African American and violated a Jim Crow statute, period.
Yep. Okay, so here's another one, folks. Here's the current version. Black codes, which were laws enacted after Civil War. Black codes denied African Americans their basic civil rights in Florida. The laws made it a crime for African American men to be unemployed. I mean, folks, but don't just read right past this, by the way. Like that, this is part of what Dr. Terry and I teach about and talk about when we go on our learning tour trips about how much racism embedded in the society. But back to the point, the laws made it a crime for African American men to be unemployed. If an African American man did not have a job, he could be fined a large amount of money or imprisoned. These laws also prevented African Americans from serving on a jury. That's the current version. Here's the proposed version by the textbook publisher. Many state legislatures, notice that it doesn't mention Florida here. Many state legislatures created laws that were biased or unfair toward formerly enslaved people. Historically known as the Black Codes, these laws enforced discrimination and segregation. They even made it a crime for men of certain groups to be unemployed. These laws also prevented certain groups of people from serving on a jury. What is going on here is the elimination, the erasure of, as you pointed out at the beginning of this evening tonight, Terry, and so I'm going to come back to you, is the erasure of African-American work, courage, determination, brilliance, excellence, as it's gone on in American life. It isn't just getting rid of truth. That's terrible enough, but it is the erasure of a certain set of identities and certain people.
Absolutely. It's the erasure of a set of identities in certain people. It is, as you mentioned, Dr. Butler, the erasure of an ability to create racial harmony and reconciliation. I have mentioned this before, and I will say again, I cannot tell you how many times I have received evaluations where the students were very specific in saying, white students, I was raised in a particular way, essentially to be a racist, and learning about these things in your class have changed how I think. So it's an erasure of that ability. It also does something else. What does it do to the Black children who are in those courses, in those classrooms? It denies them the ability of seeing themselves in the narrative. It tells them that if something they're learning perhaps at home about their history, which is all of our collective history, the teacher is telling us that that's not what's happening. My classmates are saying that's not what's happening. It disallows them from seeing themselves in a heroic way in the history. It disallows them from understanding this arc of resilience and agency that African Americans have. And so it hurts people from all functions as it further others African Americans.
Yeah, a couple of things. So I'm going to answer a couple of questions that have come up, and then I'm going to ask you to talk about where you're going and what you're going to do, Dr. Terry. So the question is from the folks at the watch party: will this bill affect religious studies, healthcare at universities, science, and other disciplines? And there's a fair degree of expectation that it will affect religious studies, right, Dr. Butler?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the point. You know, all the questions that you've been asked, will it do this? Will it do that? Maybe on one campus it will. Maybe on one campus it won't. The way that the bill is written gives an institution's board of trustees or board of governors or whatever you want to call it to eliminate and disqualify what they consider to be problematic groups that have committed the cardinal sin of promoting, supporting, or maintaining programs that espouse diversity, equity, or inclusion. Not DE&I programs, but any program that promotes equity and diversity. So that's where we get the African American sororities and fraternities. This is where we get our Jewish study programs. This is where we get our gender and sexuality studies programs. This is where we could get our African American studies minor eliminated. If all of this is followed and interpreted by the way the bill is written, and you know, to your point, Dr. David, we are not having a conversation because we are not dealing with good faith actors. When the politicians who propose these bills and this legislation say, oh no, that's not what we meant, guess what? I don't trust them because they haven't demonstrated themselves to be worthy of trust. They're not having a good faith conversation, period. So all the questions about, could this eliminate X, Y, and Z? Does it espouse diversity, equity, or inclusion in any way, shape, or form? Then the answer is yes.
And there's something else that's very important about that you mentioned earlier, Dr. Butler, is that people are preemptively changing course titles and course syllabi out of what? Out of fear that they will be targeted, out of fear that they will be under a microscope and that whatever they are teaching will be misinterpreted or fall under the arms of this law that says you're doing something wrong. So now you have professors and K through 12 educators in the state of Florida, and this is not just relegated to Florida, folks. Things are happening in other states as well, Texas, Tennessee, North Carolina, who are purposefully moving away from teaching truth because they are afraid to do so. And we can't condemn them for that.
Right.
This is their livelihood. So we have to understand that if they choose to stand up and take a stance against this, they could lose their job just like Dr. Jokl did this past week.
Okay. Ruth wants to know when the Zoom's going to end. Probably in about a half hour from right now, Ruth. Probably in about a half hour. Eric wants to know what's the constitutionality of the proposed bills. It's not clear. Certainly, it seems to violate the First Amendment, and also your right to have work, to be an educator, to have a job. There's a variety of things, but that takes time, and that requires judges to make decisions too, all right? So these are all complicated scenarios. I want to pivot now to what Common Power does. Common Power is about action, okay? We are all pissed, angry, outraged here. And the job for us as an organization is to channel that. And so Dr. Terry Scott is the director of the Institute for Common Power, and she leads through intellect and she leads through example. Okay, so Dr. Terry, can you tell us, we're going to focus on you here a little bit, as always makes you a little uncomfortable, I know, but can we focus on you a little bit? Can you talk a little bit about what you are deciding to do in the next 10 days, specifically as a first step in our Truth Matters initiative?
Right, as a first step in our Truth Matters initiative are these kinds of conversations, so that we can teach people exactly what's happening. I put something in the chat there that Dr. Domke and I are going to hold, and it's first Thursdays, it's actually last Thursdays of each month, where we will be talking about different ways that you can get involved. The most frequent thing that people ask is, what can I do? There is a lot that you can do. Dr. Butler, you referenced it earlier when you started to talk about school board elections. People who know me know I talk about that endlessly because it makes all the difference in the world. And you know why it makes a difference? When somebody says my vote doesn't count, sometimes those elections are won or lost by a literal handful of votes. So we're going to be holding those so that people can come and learn what they can do. Next week, I'm going to Flagler College by the invitation of Dr. Butler to speak about some of my work and my latest book, Lynching and Leisure: Race and the Transformation of Mob Violence in Texas, which I am assuming at some point will be banned somewhere if it already has not been. God forbid that a solidly academic study that was 20 years in the making would be something that would cause angst for people. I will tell you this, I am very active on Twitter. And when I have posted talking about this, I've had to block a number of people who have just simply put words like racist or you're causing a divide. People become very active, especially in the case of anonymity, when they can hide behind their computers and do so when they want to attack something that they fear or that makes them feel uncomfortable. And so next week, not only will we be talking about the work and the book, I will be making ties to how lynching is not a relic of the Jim Crow past, but how it is a modern form of racial terror. And I write about that in the last chapter of the book. And I believe, Dr. Butler, we will also be showing the 15-minute documentary that I am honored to be featured in, that won an NAACP 2022 Image Award and was shortlisted for an Oscar. And that's called Lynching Postcards, Token of a Great Day.
We absolutely will be showing that, Dr. Scott.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Can I ask you a couple questions now, Dr. Terry? So it's great that you're gonna, no, that's not really even the best word. Let me start that again. I deeply respect that you are going to go to Florida to deliver this talk. When you were invited to this talk by Dr. Butler, you knew it'd be going to Florida, okay? But it's here now. It's here. It's a little bit different. And look, Florida is probably a wonderful place, but it's a difficult place legally for educators right now. All right. So what are some of the things that have gone through your mind as you approach this journey of yours?
Well, the first one, and when Dr. Butler asked me, things were beginning to heat up because you had already, Dr. Butler, been denied the ability to teach about the long civil rights history, but they had not flared in the way that they have now. Not since it seems that DeSantis has put in his hat, or will officially, for a bid to get the nomination to be the Republican candidate for governor, and seeks very clearly to nationalize local policy. So things have gotten much worse. And one of the questions I said to Dr. Butler was, are you okay with this? Because I am fully aware of the fact that I go into the space and then I leave. And so I wanted to make sure that he was okay with bringing me there to talk about lynching. If we're going to talk about topics that people want to hide when it comes to the less than pious parts of our history, lynching is surely one of them. Let's be very clear. In the way that history has been taught in this country, it has never been taught totally inclusively. That is why students arrive at all of our classrooms bereft of the full knowledge of African-American history. So just to be clear about that. And lynching is way high on the list of things that they know almost nothing about. So I wanted to make sure he was okay. I will also say this. My husband has voiced numerous concerns about my safety going there. And if it were up to him, he'd prefer I not, because he's afraid that people who are on the fringe, who follow any of us on social media, want to seek us and do harm. Dr. Hassan Jeffries was on our program just a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about how there is somebody currently sitting in a federal prison because of threats that they pushed against him because of his work in social justice and racial justice.
So you have made a decision, okay, to go there, but this is just the start. This is what we're building momentum. By the end of this call, by the end of this Zoom call, we're going to have an announcement. Okay, we're going to have an announcement by the end of this Zoom conversation. We are building towards something. It's the fight for our democracy, but you've made that decision. So, okay, you told us a little bit about what's on your mind, but I want to know the why. I want to know the why. Why?
Why is because this is what I am supposed to do. Since I was 15 years old, I mentioned this in the beginning, I wanted to be a professor. I grew up experiencing a lot of racism outside of the city of Chicago, people calling me the N-word and Blackie and Darkie. And I reasoned very young that if I could teach people the true history of this country, that we could begin to dismantle a lot of that racism. And I have never let go of that ideology because I have seen it work in real time where it makes a difference. All of us do. At the Institute for Common Power, we teach people the truth. We do that to catalyze them into the work that we do at Common Power. We've seen it on the ground when we go and talk to people who are knocking on doors, when we tell them the gravity of the history and the space that they are in, when we go to Georgia and say, this is Georgia's history and this is why we need you. It makes them feel supported. It pushes them to keep going. And so I have an obligation to make sure to expose the truth in history, to allow people to understand it, to heal from it, to be motivated by the things that people were able to do before us. I call history all the time the best self-help book, because if people who came before us could do what they do and create a better world for us where we can sit on this call, where we can, as we take people on our truth and purpose learning experiences, sit as an integrated group on a bus and cross over interstate lines in a time where we would have been beaten previously to do that. If people could make a difference, then this is nothing. This is easy. We can do this.
Dr. Butler, why? Why do you bother getting on this Zoom? Why do you do this? Why did you invite her, Dr. Terry, to come?
I do it because I want my students to know more about these important topics than I did when I was their age, to start with. Number two, I do it because I am a patriot. That word has been co-opted and weaponized in a way that does those of us who truly love this country for all it is, it does us a disservice. I think that the quintessential American story is the African-American story. It's all of our story. It's all of our experience. And I do this because I expect more of my nation. I don't teach these topics because I hate this country. I teach these topics because I love this country and I want it to fulfill its promise equally to all citizens. The fact that simply because of the genetic characteristic that no one had any control over before they were born or after, deprived them their constitutional rights should be offensive to everyone who claims to love history. So I do it because I want my students to be more enlightened, dare I say woke, than I was at their age. I also do it because I recognize that as a white guy with this accent, with this forum, I have the privilege to speak for people who don't have the same privilege to speak openly and freely that I do. One of the most humbling things about this entire experience has been the number of teachers who have said, thank you. We can't speak. You can. The other thing is I do this because I actually learn from the past. I learn that if people can be killed, lynched, threatened, lose their livelihoods, leave a place like St. Augustine for most of their adult life because they tried to integrate a downtown lunch counter, and I've talked to those people. If they can risk their lives, their livelihoods, their families, then at least I can tell those stories. I am doing them a disservice by knowing this and remaining silent. That is the ultimate hypocrisy. So I do this for all of those reasons. And, you know, to come back to something that both of you have kind of said about students who say, now that I know this history, you know, my thinking has evolved. That's the power of higher education. And guess what, folks? When our students learn this history, they don't get mad at me. They don't get mad at Dr. Terry. They don't get mad at Dr. David. They get mad at their parents and their former teachers who didn't tell them the truth about all of these things and allowed them to remain willfully ignorant. So I do it for all of those reasons.
This is a book I'm reading right now about Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, Until I'm Free, written by Dr. Keisha Blaine. And it's about the incredible work and words of Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer in the 1960s and 70s. And I just want to read one quote because it's applicable to you as a white man, a Southern white man doing this work. She said, I don't want to, this is her words, I don't want to hear you say, honey, I'm behind you. Well, move. I don't want you back there because you could be 200 miles behind. I want you to say, I'm with you and we'll go up this freedom road together. All right. So, Dr. Butler, that's what you and I and people like us who look like us and have the positions that we have, the ability, we need to do that now, not in theory, not because we would like to, but we need to literally do that right now. Back to you, Dr. Terry. I'd love just for a little bit of teaching right now for a minute. From the book about lynching, you're going to talk about this. Some on this call have heard you talk about lynching from our work, but what's one thing about lynching in America that you spent all this time researching and all this time studying, and now you teach about, and thank God you do, because I've learned a ton from you. What's one thing that you'd want us to know?
One thing, many things, but one thing, I'm going to say this first. St. Augustine, if we're going to do a moment of teaching, is the space of one of the earliest free African-American communities in North America. When we talk about learning from freedom fighters, they had gone there to gain their freedom. They risked life and limb and ran away because they were told by the Spanish that if they could come here, we will grant you your freedom. St. Augustine, and I think I don't know if there are any historical markers there, Dr. Butler, I'm looking for it. There are, great to seeing those. So how apropos that you are there and continuing that fight for freedom of education, and so that people know exactly what other people don't know in this country. You made a very good point when you said they don't get mad at us. They get mad at their former teachers. They get mad at their parents. That's certainly something to think about. Going back to your question, David, when you're asking me one thing I wish people would know, the thing that always comes out when I'm talking about this, I look at the transition of lynching from what was considered a so-called quiet violence, where you find a body hanging in the middle, in the morning. The people who killed the person were masked. Typically, the victim was white, and there was no fanfare. The body was intact. But I look at the transition. How do we go from that to moments where these are spectacle lynchings, where the victims are Black, where they're done in the middle of the day, when it's done with such impunity that nobody cares that they are caught because they're not going to be punished for it. And then there are corporal souvenirs taken from the bodies and a fanfare and announcements in newspapers. So I look at that transition, and there are many things that allow for this transition. There's one very key one. After emancipation, the concept of crime changes. So in the course of this freedom of African Americans, a basic existence essentially becomes criminalized. If Black people attempted to vote, it's considered a criminal act. If Black people have a successful business, it's a criminal act. if they are establishing a community that is African-American or pushing people to move out of the South or immigrate to Africa, because it is about stepping outside of somebody's place. You are supposed to exist within the context of your place. There's a historical continuum that we see today. Same thing. This is why Black people of the police called on them when, for instance, are trying to enter a gym in their apartment complex, that's an affluent apartment complex, and somebody calls the police on them because they say, you, Black person, couldn't possibly be affluent enough to live here. You, Black person who is running down the street, Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia in a white neighborhood, you don't belong here. You are outside of your boundaries and we are going to murder you for it. It is that historical continuum that bothers me, that I know that if people can understand it, and if more people can recognize it and see its existence, then they can do things to work against it. How do they work against it? Whether it's hiring or electing politicians who will make sure to put things in place like the George Floyd policing bill, or simply teaching your children to do better.
Is there going to be a live stream possibly of her, Dr. Terry Scott talk when she's there, Dr. Butler?
I saw that question in the Q&A, and I think that's a wonderful question. I wasn't planning to have that organized, but it's going to be one of the first things that I ask our AV people when I come in the morning. I think that's a great idea.
Okay, another question in here is there, so the gentleman that Dr. Terry mentioned who got fired just this past week was at a private Christian university in Palm Beach. So there is a question in here about whether you as at a private university feel like this has impact on you. You said something at the beginning before we came on the call when you were talking to Terry and me, that every university, is this correct, in the state receives state monies in some form.
Yeah, that's absolutely the truth. We may be immune from the state board of governors from that level, but in terms of, are we immune from these pressures and these laws? Absolutely not. Because, as we said before we came on, even private colleges receive state funding at some level. So no, we are not immune totally from these pressures and these decisions.
Okay. All right. I want to go to that moment of announcement now, Dr. Terry. Are you ready to go to the moment of announcement?
Definitely. Let's do it.
Okay.
And I also want to, go ahead.
No.
Excited, look.
Right. I just want to set it up. Okay. I want to set it up. But do you have something else? Other things?
Yeah, I was just going to point people to the chat and tell them to register, because we have a lot that we offer at Common Power and the Institute for Common Power. And I want them to come and hear what we have to say. It'll be essentially an informational session the last Thursday of every month. So please go to that registration link and register. So it costs you nothing to do so. Go ahead.
Okay, so your chat message went out to everybody, even though people's chat messages only come to us. Is that right? I think so. I think that might have gone just to me and to Dr. Butler.
I put it to everyone. I'm gonna see. Did you? Okay, you did the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the most important thing that we can do right now is bring visibility to this, because we on this call probably don't have the ability to necessarily stop this bill in Florida. Okay. But we can bring visibility to it. And we're entering a presidential election campaign where Governor Ron DeSantis is going to run for the presidency. And he's going to try to turn turn America into what he's done in Florida. That's the reality of this. So we, as a first step, have decided that we want to take a little trip. And it's a second trip. The first trip is Dr. Terry going to Florida next week. But there's going to be a second trip. And we haven't made this announcement yet. So this is like the first time we're going to give voice to this. So this is that kind of little scary, terrifying moment when we're like, wait a minute. So here's the map of Florida again. Now I've highlighted St. Petersburg, Dr. Terry. Okay. Then that's St. Petersburg over there on the eastern part of the western part of the state over in the Gulf. So back to you, Dr. Terry. What are we going to do?
We are doing a 24-hour teach-in. And I want to give credit where credit is due. We have a scholar called the We the People public scholar at the Institute for Common Power. His name is Dr. Uhuru Williams. He's a highly respected historian. Dr. Butler, you had him speaking at Flagler College last year, I believe.
Yes, we are actually scheduling him to appear. Dr. Jeffries has been at Flagler College.
Okay, wonderful. Yes. And so Dr. Williams, who is our fellow at the Institute for Common Power, said we should do a teach-in. And we at the Institute for Common Power and Common Power, when we have an idea, we bring it to fruition immediately. And this is something that we are doing. We are going to St. Petersburg, Florida. We're going to the largest African-American church there, an AME church. And I will be honest about this. We've tried to get this on some of the targeted college campuses, and there's been a lot of fear, very understandably, among many of those professors. And so we're going to do it there because we don't want to put anybody in jeopardy. We're going to go in, we're going to physically be there, and we're going to teach what is considered, God forbid, subversive history. It is just history, but it is a history that is being targeted, and we're going to do it for 24 hours. And we're also going to teach about the history of voter suppression in this country, because how do we begin to fight against this? We make sure people are registered to vote. They're educated about the issues, and they cast that vote. So we will do all that we can, including register people to vote while we are there. But it's not going to be relegated just to Florida. Many of us will be there. Myself, Dr. Butler, Dr. Uhuru Williams, Charles Douglas, who's on this call, who is the executive director of Common Power, Dr. Hassan Jeffries, who is the brother of Representative Hakeem Jeffries. We will be in Florida, but we're going to enlist people from around the country. And for 24 hours, and David, you're going to be in charge of this with a number of other people from the Institute, make sure that from 5 p.m., starting on May 17th, what is May 17th? The anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, lasting 24 hours to the next day, people can tune in, and we ask that you leave your computer on for those 24 hours and listen to people like the incredible documentarian Stanley Nelson, who talks about the work that he's doing. Dr. Harry Edwards, who is an icon when it comes to education, to action, and so many other professors and activists from around the country who will join us. And we are going to bring attention to what is happening in Florida. We want to do it in a way where we do not put the livelihoods of professors and educators in danger, but that calls attention to what's happening, that registers people to vote, and that catalyzes more people to get in this fight to stop what's happening in Florida. Did I miss anything?
Oh, we're going to do this as part of our 1-year anniversary of the Institute for Common Power. So, folks, Dr. Terry Scott was working full-time at Hood College last year at this time. Full-time. She was running a department. She was running a department there and working at Common Power. But we're not even 1 year into the Institute for Common Power. And this is going to be a signature event for us. If nothing else, we are going to go and do 24 hours of teaching, 24 hours of it. We're going to do it live in person there for the first couple hours, and then we're going to be on Zoom for the rest of the time. And we might have people from around, we will have people from around the country who will be participating in this experience. We need to bring energy and attention. I know that one of the things that I experience when I read back history is that I see the thing that was the outcome, the law that was passed, the moment of people getting on the buses for the freedom rides. But the reality is it takes an awful lot of time to build that energy and that momentum. One of the tools we have at our hands is Zoom, to be able to teach virtually in real time to anywhere on the planet if someone has the technology. All right, so we're going to leverage that and do this. And we're going to go right into Florida, to the heart of this, on the anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education. If folks want to go, they can go, or at least you can join us on Zoom. By the time we get there 2 months from now, because it's almost 2 months from now exactly right now, Dr. Terry, it's almost 2 months exactly from now. By the time we get there, who knows? We have a former president who's about to be indicted. Okay, we have a governor in Florida that wants to turn America into the same situation where truth is squelched is silenced. Dr. Terry's going next week to Florida. Between now and then, we're going to Georgia and Alabama on a learning tour. In April, we're going on another learning tour with a whole bunch of CP volunteer folks. By the time we get 2 months from now, there's no guarantees. There are no guarantees. But in the words of that American hero over my shoulder, Mr. John Lewis, I don't know about you all, but I'm going to march. That's what he would say. I am going to march. And so we're going to go to Florida, starting with Dr. Terry next week. And we're going to do what we can to raise energy and attention around this, and then turn that into action in the field in our political work for people that will stand for truth. That's not a partisan statement. They'll just stand for truth, right? So, Dr. Butler, does it, to come back to you and then back to you, Dr. Terry, and we'll finish here. One of the things that I get concerned about is that people in Florida will feel, oh, like they're being kind of called out in a negative way here. That the people who are fighting for truth and justice will feel like they're kind of, oh, like they're like that somehow we're mocking them or something like that in our attention on Florida. Like, don't become Florida, right? And I don't ever want to, I don't ever want to get to that point. So I want to ask you directly, what is your sensibility about somebody coming and doing this kind of teaching there?
Y'all are a bunch of outside agitators coming to disrupt our way of life. And you just, no, wait a minute. That's what they said in Mississippi in the 40s and 50s. How do I feel about it? Sad that it's come to this. I never would have thought in 2023 that a question like that would be legitimately asked, or that a teach-in organized by an institute like Common Power would be needed. So it's depressing, it's sad. It's needed. What I will say is that there are a lot of teachers in Florida, there are many teachers that I talk to who are glad that we are now under the microscope, so to speak, because they have felt like they have been alone for so long now. So I feel that I feel like it's nice to have allies who are finally, instead of telling people in states like ours what we could be doing better, that are instead asking, what can we do to help you? And I think that's a turning point.
Okay, awesome. Dr. Terry, lots of questions. I'm just confirming here. We will be notifying everybody who's registered for this event, about the details of the Thursday events that you're talking about and the 24-hour teach-ins, which we don't have a name for yet. We're going to have a great name for it, but our 24-hour teach-ins. Everybody will get email information. We will promote it beyond anything Common Power has ever promoted before. We're
Correct.
Going in on this one.
Right. Absolutely, yes. So, and we will send everyone a recording of this conversation. I know that people ask for that because they want to share it with others. Share it widely. Immediately, one of the things that you can do is share the information. When we send out that email, send it off, each of you, to 10 other people and tell them to register to come to the last Thursdays to learn what to do. Tell them about the teaching. Tell them to join. We want the numbers. We want people to be on the call. We want so many people learning this history and being on the call that we have to upgrade our Zoom account so that we can accommodate the thousands and thousands of people who will be present and learning about this. So you can help us in that endeavor.
The Florida of today is the America of tomorrow. It matters.
Right.
Thank you all, Dr. Terry, Dr. Michael, everybody's on this call, everybody you're going to tell. The reality is that the foot soldiers in the civil rights movement are the ones who showed up every day. They showed up every day. And we're just trying to show up. That's it. Thank you, Dr. Terry, for your leadership. Thank you, Dr. Butler. Good night, right?
Dr. Domke and Dr. Butler.
Thank you so much for having me.
You could